Did you know that one of the most famous painters in history only sold a single painting during his entire lifetime? Imagine being so broke that even your family looks at your art and says, "That's nice, Vincent, but maybe keep the day job." Or how about this? Vincent van Gogh, the man whose paintings are now worth hundreds of millions, once ate his own paint. Yes, you heard that right. Forget fine wine and cheese. Van Gogh was out here sampling tubes of ultramarine like it was a five-star buffet. And here's another shocker. He painted some of the most peaceful and beautiful scenes in history, like starry skies and blooming sunflowers. But in reality, his life was basically the opposite of peaceful. It was more chaotic than your Wi-Fi connection during a Netflix binge. Welcome to History Makers, where history is chaos, comedy, and brilliant accidents. If you love crazy true stories from the past, hit subscribe and like this video so you don't miss the next adventure. So why should you stick around for Vincent van Gogh's story? Because this is not just the tale of a sad guy with a missing ear. This is the saga of a man who turned failure into legend, who transformed loneliness into masterpieces, and who became one of the greatest artists in history, long after he was gone. Vincent Willem van Gogh was born on March 30th, 1853, in a little Dutch village called Zundert. Now, here's a weird start to his story. Vincent was actually named after his older brother, who died before he was born. Yes, you heard that right. His parents literally named him after the deceased baby. Imagine growing up with the pressure of being the replacement child. That's not just a tough childhood, that's a horror movie plot. His father, Theodorus, was a minister, and his mother, Anna, was an artist. So Vincent grew up in a house full of both sermons and sketches. Basically, one parent preached about the heavens, while the other drew them. A poetic combo, but also kind of a confusing one for a kid. From an early age, Vincent wasn't exactly the cheerful type. People around him described him as serious, quiet, and a little moody. In other words, the perfect prototype for every art student who later sits in a cafe writing poetry about rain. He had a younger brother, Theo, who would later become his best friend, financial supporter, and ultimate hype man. Seriously, if Vincent was Batman, Theo was Alfred, Robin, and Commissioner Gordon rolled into one. Without Theo, Vincent probably wouldn't have painted half the masterpieces we know today. Now, here's one of those rarely mentioned facts. Little Vincent was obsessed with nature. He'd wander the countryside collecting bugs, sketching plants, and staring at fields for hours. To his parents, this probably looked like a kid daydreaming, but in reality, he was building the mental Pinterest board that would one day become his art. Despite this early interest, he didn't actually start painting until his late 20s. As a kid and young adult, Vincent tried just about every job that was not art. He worked at an art dealership, became a teacher, tried his hand at being a preacher like his dad, and even did a short gig as a missionary. Spoiler alert, he failed at all of them. If LinkedIn had existed back then, his profile would have been a tragic comedy of constant job hopping. And let's talk about his education. He didn't exactly shine at school. He bounced around from one program to another, but formal education was never his strong suit. To put it bluntly, if there had been class superlatives, Vincent wouldn't have gotten most likely to succeed. He would have gotten most likely to confuse everyone at reunions. But here's the twist. All those failures, all those awkward attempts at being something he wasn't, they eventually funneled him into the one thing he was destined to do. Paint. And not just paint, but paint in a way that literally changed the art world forever. By the time Vincent finally picked up a paintbrush seriously in his late 20s, he was already carrying a backpack full of failures. But when he started painting, it was like all the puzzle pieces clicked. Sure, the puzzle picture looked like it had been chewed on by a goat, but it was still progress. One of his earliest breakthroughs came when he moved to Paris in 1886. At this time, Paris was the Avengers' headquarters for artists. You had Monet, Degas, Renoir, the Impressionist squad, all redefining what art could be. And Vincent shows up like the awkward exchange student who doesn't know the dress code. At first, he struggled to fit in, painting in dark, moody tones. His early works looked like the world's saddest potato catalog. But then, boom, he discovered color. And not just a little color, he went full-on rainbow mode. Vincent saw the Impressionists using light and bright colors, and he cranked it up to 11. He started experimenting with bold yellows, swirling blues, and brushstrokes so wild they looked like they'd been painted during a sugar rush. Now, here's a fun fact. Vincent was so intense about his art that he would sometimes finish an entire painting in a single day. We're not talking little canvases either, we're talking giant masterpieces. Imagine Netflix binging an entire season in one sitting, except instead of Dorito dust on his fingers, he ended up with Starry Night. Speaking of Starry Night, let's talk about the heavy hitters. This painting, made in 1889 while Vincent was in a mental asylum, is now one of the most famous works of art in history. But at the time, nobody cared. If you had told Vincent that Starry Night would one day be printed on coffee mugs, shower curtains, and phone cases, he probably would have said, "Wait, what's a phone case?" And then there are the sunflowers. Ah, yes, the sunflowers. What do you do when life keeps rejecting you? You paint giant, happy flowers like you're trying to trick yourself into being cheerful. Fun trivia. Vincent painted not one, not two, but a whole series of sunflower paintings. It was like his version of Marvel sequels. And just like the Marvel franchise, people either loved them or thought, "Okay, Vincent, maybe tone it down." Now let's talk about the infamous ear incident. Here's what actually happened. In 1888, Vincent was living in Arles, France, and he invited another artist, Paul Gauguin, to come live and paint with him. At first, it was fun. Two artists in a brocation of creativity. But quickly, things went downhill. They argued constantly. Gauguin was laid back. Vincent was, let's say, high-strung. Eventually, after one heated fight, Vincent famously cut off part of his own ear. Some historians say it was the whole ear, others say just a chunk. Either way, he ended up giving it to a woman who worked at a local brothel, because nothing says, "I love you," quite like handing someone a severed ear wrapped in newspaper. But here's the kicker. Even during this period of chaos, Vincent was producing an insane amount of art. In just over a decade, he created around 2,100 artworks, including 860 oil paintings. That's more output than most people have selfies on their phones. And yet, during his lifetime, he only managed to sell one painting. One. A piece called The Red Vineyard, sold for about 400 francs. That's roughly a few $100s in today's money. Meanwhile, in 1990, his painting Portrait of Dr. Gachet sold for $82.5 million. So yeah, Vincent was basically the ultimate example of being ahead of your time. What's wild is that his technique was revolutionary. His thick brush strokes, bold colors, and emotional intensity basically set the stage for modern art. At the time, critics thought his work was sloppy and unfinished. But today, those same brushstrokes are celebrated as genius. That's like being mocked for wearing Crocs in high school, and then 10 years later, Crocs are on the runway at Paris Fashion Week. For all the masterpieces Vincent created, his personal life was, let's just say, less Starry Night, and more stormy afternoon with a chance of total meltdown. By the late 1880s, his mental health had taken a serious nosedive. We've already covered the ear incident, but that was just one piece of the chaos. Vincent suffered from episodes of psychosis and depression. Some historians think he may have had epilepsy, bipolar disorder, or even poisoning from the paints he was literally eating. That's right. In addition to creating art with paint, Vincent occasionally treated it like a snack. Talk about commitment to your craft. After the ear fiasco, he checked himself into an asylum in Saint-Rémy-de-Provence. Now, most people would treat an asylum stay as rock bottom, but Vincent? He turned it into his most productive art retreat ever. Picture it. Other patients are pacing the halls, while Vincent is outside in the garden, painting irises, like he is at a botanical spa. He even painted the view from his barred window, which gave us Starry Night. Leave it to Van Gogh to take a mental breakdown and turn it into a cultural treasure. But despite the bursts of creativity, his health kept declining. He left the asylum and moved closer to his brother Theo in Auvers-sur-Oise, near Paris. There, under the care of Dr. Paul Gachet, the doctor with the most melancholic mustache in history, Vincent painted more than one canvas per day. Imagine producing 70 paintings in 2 months. Most of us can't even fold our laundry in that time. And yet, despite the artistic explosion, Vincent was plagued by loneliness and despair. He felt like a burden to Theo, who was himself struggling financially and with health issues. On July 27, 1890, Vincent went out into a field with a pistol. He shot himself in the chest, but in the most Van Gogh way possible. Even his death didn't follow the normal script. He didn't die immediately. Instead, he stumbled back to the inn where he was staying, smoked a pipe, and talked with Theo. He passed away 2 days later at the age of 37. Now here's the twist that makes Van Gogh's story both tragic and absurd. During his life, he sold just one painting. He died believing he was a failure. But within a few decades, his work started gaining recognition. By the early 20th century, he was being hailed as one of the greatest painters who ever lived. His brother Theo, who always believed in him, tragically died just 6 months after Vincent. But Theo's wife Johanna took on the role of promoter. She worked tirelessly to exhibit and publish Vincent's letters, spreading his story and his art. Without her, Vincent might still be remembered as just a weird guy who cut off his ear. Instead, he became a legend. And here's a kicker for you. Today, Van Gogh's paintings are some of the most expensive and recognizable in the world. His portrait of Dr. Gachet sold for over $80 million in 1990. Irises went for $53 million. Sunflowers? Priceless cultural treasures. Meanwhile, during his life, he could barely afford paint. That's like Beethoven dying poor, and then one day you hear his symphony as a ringtone on a kid's phone. Oh wait, that actually happened too. Van Gogh's legacy isn't just about the art, though. It's about perseverance. He failed at almost everything, struggled with mental illness, and faced rejection from society. But he poured his heart and soul into his work anyway. And in the end, the world finally caught up with him. He became proof that sometimes genius isn't recognized in the moment. Sometimes it takes the world a little longer to see the stars. And that, my friends, is the story of Vincent van Gogh, the man who gave the world starry skies, golden fields, and sunflowers so cheerful they could cheer up a funeral. The man who was dismissed as a failure while alive, yet became a legend after death. And the man who proved that even if you feel like a disaster in the moment, history might still call you a genius later. Remember that fact from the beginning, that he only sold one painting in his entire lifetime. Well, today his art is not only priceless, it's literally protected in some of the most famous museums in the world. If that's not the ultimate comeback story, I don't know what is. And let's be honest, no matter how tough life gets, at least you haven't given your ear to a stranger as a romantic gesture. So, next time you're having a bad day, just think, at least I'm doing better than Van Gogh on December 23rd, 1888. If you enjoyed this story, like the video, subscribe to History Makers and tell us in the comments which fact about Van Gogh surprised you the most. Was it the ear, the paint snacks, or the fact that he pumped out 2,100 works in just a decade? We'd love to know, because here at History Makers, we believe history isn't just about dates and dusty textbooks. It's about real people, messy lives, and the kind of chaos that makes you realize the past was just as wild as the present. So hit subscribe, join us for the next adventure, and remember, sometimes the biggest failures in their own time turn out to be the brightest stars in history.